Buckle up.
Yep, I'm way ahead of you.
I don't have a Baseball Hall of Fame vote, but if I did, I would keep Curt Schilling out. Not because of his petty online tirade asking to be removed from the ballot after he narrowly missed election. Not because of his controversial political views. Not because he once advocated for lynching journalists. Not because he bilked the state of Rhode Island with his failed company. Nope, none of those. I would keep Schill out because it's not the Hall of very, very good.
Some writers, apparently too many of them, are looking at his post-retirement rhetoric in judging his baseball career. I separate the two. Clearly, some people don't. I get that.
When you're looking at what Curt Schilling has done and what he did as a player, he is a Hall, for my book, and that's why, for my money, he is a Hall of Famer.
Completely unrelenting. That's how former Mets manager Mickey Callaway is described in a bombshell article released last night by The Athletic, in which 5 different women accuse Callaway of inappropriate behavior.
But the games will look different due to COVID-19. Salt River Fields will operate at 17% capacity, or about 2,200 fans in the stadium, to meet social distance guidelines. Fans will be required to wear masks unless they're enjoying a hot dog and beer. And seating will be in pods, assigned areas in the outfield. Although time will tell what impact the pandemic will ultimately have on spring training's Moneyball.
Think about some of the negative thoughts you may have had about the inactivity of the Cardinals, and presto, Nolan Arenado shows up. The Cardinals tell me tonight that the deal has been worked on for months. When he arrives, the Cardinals are getting maybe the best single defensive player in all of baseball, regardless of position.
Anyone ever tell you look like a penis with a little hat on?
You're out of here!
Oh, no,
right
no,
now,
no,
Jimmy,
you,
I heard
you
that!
Misunderstood.
You misunderstood me!
No More Misunderstanding, although it does rank as one of the greatest baseball movies of all time. Hi, once again, everybody. I'm Ed Berliner. Welcome in. The man in the arena welcomes you into another edition of Sports Pulse, and it's about time we got down to baseball, and it's a good thing because there's a lot going on in baseball, and I will have to tell you that before I introduce my guest, this is a guy that I have followed religiously for so many years. I read everything that the man does, and he is one of the true originals because all the years we talked baseball on Sports Pulse, on the fastest show in sports, on all these various shows that I've had over the years, this is the guy that we always went to, and he has always been there whenever I've asked him to be a guest on the show, and he is what I consider to be, without question, one of the absolute best there is at what he does. So if I'm going to talk baseball for 2021, I call him. And it took a while to get him because he had to shovel out the snow at home in New Jersey. So it had to wait until he had all the snow taken care of. You have read him in so many places. The New York Times, the New York Post, ESPN, Fox Sports. 6 books about baseball. Last time I checked, I have to make sure that we're okay on that number. But there's also the New York Times bestseller in there, The Empire, the power behind the New York Yankees. And for this discussion, it's important to note that since 1983, yes, kids, there was a time before 2000, he has been a voting member of the Baseball Writers Association of America, which is where a lot of this discussion will go today. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome my old friend, Bob Klapisch, joins us on Sports Pulse today. Bob, you look relaxed for a man who's been shoveling snow all week. It's good to see you again, partner.
Well, it is good to see you. I have to say it was a harrowing experience. I mean, in my entire life, living in New Jersey, New York, I've never seen snow like that. And
ever.
Almost didn't dig out, almost didn't make it, ever. It was like 24 inches of heavy snow. I walked outside of my house, and it was mid-thigh level. Mid-thigh. That's how bad it was.
See,
fortunately, a kind neighbor took pity on me, came over with his plow. He runs a landscaping business. Had he not come over with his truck and his plow, I still wouldn't have been able to do your show.
It's just, to this point, we always think back. I mean, I think back as a kid growing up in New York, and it was all about, well, you get one of the kids to go ahead, and maybe they'll come over and they'll take care and they'll shovel your snow. Kids don't do that anymore, do they? I mean, it's not like you got kids walking around with a snow shovel going, "Hi, Mr. Klapisch, can we take care of your snow for you?" Nobody does that anymore.
Those days are over. I mean, I remember when kids used to come to the door and, offer to shovel, 2 kids, 3 kids, college kids looking for a couple extra bucks. Doesn't happen. Nobody showed up. You go on Facebook looking, Nobody. The few enterprising ones are all booked up. They don't need us. You got to go begging for them.
Well, that's just
So,
it. Now they'll
different
come
times.
over. They'll drive over with their plow now and go, "Hi, Mr. Klapisch, can we do your snow shovel? It'll only be $50." I mean, hell, I think the
50,
first
I'd
time I
take that in
shoveled
a
snow was
minute.
$2.
Yeah, those days are over, man.
Oh man, it's good to see you, and I'm glad once again that you managed to get out because we have got so much to talk about, my friend, and it starts a lot with, I mean, you are the guy who is not afraid to say anything about anybody and print it there because you have the chops to be able to talk about it, and this comes down to Hall of Fame voting, the Baseball Writers Association of America, nobody making it in 2021. And Curt Schilling, of course, is the one that has started a tremendous amount of the conversation. So let's get to it. A lot of this deals with the BBWAA and the morals clause, which is where so much conversation comes in. It is this: voting shall be based upon the player's record, playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contributions to the teams on which the player played, which is all nice to talk about here, but you aren't afraid to point out that there is a hypocrisy level here that needs to be discussed, because the article you wrote in the Newark Star-Ledger that still has people talking is, "To my fellow baseball writers, let's address our own hypocrisy before criticizing Curt Schilling's Hall of Fame candidacy." And for those watching us on YouTube and on video, we have the exact quotes up that you talked about from your article, which mentions Bill Conlon, the longtime columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News, who was accused of child molestation by 4 different people. He resigned from the Daily News almost immediately after the story broke. Jack O'Connell, the Secretary-Treasurer, called him a member in good standing back in 2011, and one day we will discuss what has happened and why he is still in the Hall of Fame. But this gets down again to, back to that morals clause, and what everybody consistently talks about here, Bob, is that the morals clause itself is something that people are wondering if it still fits in all of this. Because no matter what happens in the discussion, people will say it's supposed to be about what the player does on the field to get him into the Hall of Fame. But there's morality there, there's character, and there's so many other things. So how do we start separating all of this, Bob?
Well, I mean, one way to do it is to put the onus back on Major League Baseball and the commissioner's office or the Hall of Fame itself. You tell us who you want us to consider. Don't make the writers do the heavy lifting here and pass judgment on in such a gray area. I mean, it's deliberately vague to whether or not we measure a person's character on the field by his contributions to his team, or whether or not we talk about what he did off the field, whether it was during his playing days or in retirement. I mean, do you put a child molester in the Hall of Fame? We did, the writers did, and after we knew about the allegations, we haven't done anything about it. So who are we to pass judgment on Curt Schilling? And that was really the basis of that column, is that before we go and critique and trash Schilling's politics and say that's a reason to keep him out, how about our own decision to look the other way on Bill Conlon, who was a horrible human being? He was never charged, he was never convicted of a crime, but only because of the allegations came out well beyond the statute of limitations. The fact that he resigned the day the story came out of the Daily News was all I needed to know about his character. He does not belong in the Hall of Fame. And until the writers take action against him and ask the Hall to remove him or revoke his J.G. Spink Award, then we're dealing from a pretty weak hand. But getting back to your original question, you know, the character clause, to me, is so vague. I think it's really incumbent upon the Hall of Fame to decide who merits consideration. It's their organization. We simply vote. It's simply our evaluation. The Hall does not belong to the writers. The Hall belongs to the Hall of Fame and the officials who have been appointed there. So let them decide whose character fits and whose doesn't.
Okay, but if the writers then, devil's advocate, if the writers are the ones who are the only individuals who cast these ballots, does it not then mean that the writers themselves, the people who put people into the Hall of Fame, need to then consider that morals clause every single time that they are deciding who goes into the Hall of Fame. And when you look at character and integrity, does that not mean that it's an opinion basis of the writers themselves as the voters to decide who has that character and integrity off the baseball diamond?
Right, but I mean, it's so subjective, Ed. I mean, how do you decide character and morals clause for someone who's never been convicted of a crime? I mean, Curt Schilling's alt-right politics are hateful. There's no question. I think most reasonable people disagree with him, but he has not committed a crime. He's simply expressing his opinion. You can make an argument that he can say what he wants. I mean, he has a First Amendment right to be as stupid as he wants, as provocative as he wants. What does that have to do with how he pitched for the Red Sox and the Phillies and the Diamondbacks? I mean, and there's a lot of writers who are liberals, are far to the left, and they use that same argument that I'm here. I'm paraphrasing. The writers are saying I'm here to judge based on his credentials, not, and that's why they put him in the Hall of Fame. I mean, Joel Sherman, colleague of mine from the New York Post, is as far left as it gets. He votes for Schilling, and he has no problem doing so. So, I mean, I'm getting back to the point of what is the morals clause? Somebody who's committed a crime, where do you draw the line? Has he actually been charged with a crime? Has he been prosecuted? And in Schilling's case is no. And, you know, it's funny. I actually use that argument when I consider the candidacies of Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. They've never been caught. They've never been disciplined for PEDs, not once. Excuse me. So why put it on me? Why put it on the BBWAA to punish them for PEDs when Major League Baseball, even the federal government, couldn't convict them of perjury on it? They're clean.
But again, devil's advocate, it's your responsibility as a member of the BBWAA. You're the only ones who have the ability to do this and to put somebody in. So should not then integrity and character fall on you to decide as a voter? And whose right is it then to tell you what is integrity and character? I mean, we've got a lot of gray area here.
Absolutely, which is why we'll probably spend an hour talking about this very issue, this only issue. But look, I'm going to use the Bonds and Clemens again as an example. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not a chemist. I don't know what they actually put in their bodies, and I'm not a cop. I'm not a detective. I'm a baseball writer, and I'm best equipped to evaluate baseball talent, baseball performance. And so, in terms of moral composition, character, it has to be pretty black and white for me to say somebody does not deserve to be in the Hall of Fame based on his behavior, based on his actions. And to me, I use the most obvious line of demarcation. What crime have you committed? I mean, I'm not going to hold somebody's politics against them. I just am not. It's just outside the scope of what the Hall of Fame is about. There's some terrible people in the Hall of Fame and have been there, have stayed there. Ty Cobb is an outright racist. So if he's in, then how do you say Curt Schilling doesn't belong in because of his politics? Kirby Puckett was accused of beating his wife, strangling her with a telephone cord. He's still in there. So, I mean, that's up to the Hall to decide whose character merits consideration, whose doesn't. So you have, and Bud Selig. Bud Selig was the ultimate gangster
was no great
of the
guy
80s.
in a lot of things that he did, sure.
No, I mean, he conspired with the owners to rob the players, you know, to depress free agency. I mean, he was a crook. I mean, he also looked the other way when the PED era flourished. He's in the Hall of Fame. So how do you draw the line at Curt Schilling?
So then we have this moral can of worms, as I like to call it, in Cooperstown. And again, this is a discussion that I know you and I have had before. And this is one that, to me, this is one of those conversations and debates that lights up sports talk radio. If you have nothing else to talk about and there's nothing out there that will get the phones lit up, all you have to do is bring in Cooperstown and morality and integrity, and bang, the phones go crazy because everybody's got
It's totally true in newspapers too. I mean, you can't get a hotter discussion in January, keep baseball on the back page, and talk about the Hall of Fame. You're right.
So then, if we're going to do this, and I guess this has always been part of my discussion, you bring up Bill Conlon in your article, and you bring up Kirby Puckett, and there's always the Pete Rose issue that comes into here that winds its way into the discussion. If we are going to then say that Curt Schilling, for instance, and we just use him because he's the 2021 poster child, that he's the one that has terrible integrity off the field, no character whatsoever. He's a guy who's just a bad guy, end of story, and he's got to go. Okay, then do we not then have to go back through every single person that's been in the Hall of Fame?
Exactly.
And we have to
Exactly.
then, Ty Cobb was a racist and he was proud of it. And the individuals who got in here who had things happen. Look, Babe Ruth wasn't the nicest guy in the world. If you want to go look at it off the field, there's
Right.
a lot of
Right.
different things that we
Right.
can hold against him. So, boy, here it is again. Do we have to start exercising all of these demons from Cooperstown? Or, here, let me throw this out here for a giggles and grins possibility. Do we have to then start putting on the plaques of individuals who have been elected and are in the Hall of Fame? Ty Cobb, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, however, a known and avowed racist. Do we not have to then go back to those who held Jackie Robinson back, Hank Aaron back from what they did? If we are going to be politically correct, does that PC then not have to wind up smack dab in our face every single time we talk about who's in the Hall of Fame?
There's no question, as I mentioned in that column that you posted up on screen, once you start cleansing the hall, it'll never stop. I mean, because you got to work backwards retroactively, and you start digging into the history of every player who's ever been inducted and looking for things that are offensive by today's standards. That's a process that once it begins, it will never end. And is that really what the Hall of Fame is supposed to be? I mean, I thought it was supposed to be to honor players who are great players. Now we have to, if we're going to start judging whether or not they were great human beings or not, that's an entirely different exercise. And that's a really, really tangled web that you're about to take on. And I'm not sure that it stays on message to what the Hall's original purpose was.
If we're going to do that then, or at
Right.
least another part of the discussion here, morality changes. Things that we learn about players change. Do we then simply have to then take from this point forward as our society changes and as our looks at what is in society? Do we leave the Ty Cobbs and the racists alone because it was in an era where nobody identified with it nor thought about it? But from now, 2021 moving forward, because we know whether it's racism, whether it's MAGA, if you will, whether it's following Donald Trump and politics or whomever you want to follow, that we just have to move forward and say, okay, the Hall then has to say that moving forward, we have to take that into consideration. It's a hard line. Where do we cut that line? But maybe we do have to start putting society involved in the Hall of Fame now, moving forward.
Right. And if that's the case,
does that make sense?
Sure it does. I mean, but whose job is that going to be? Is it the baseball writers or is it the Hall of Fame? I mean, they've issued instructions to consider moral character and behavior on the field. Now, if they want to tweak that, that's certainly their right. It's their entity. The Hall of Fame is theirs. We are asked to judge the players, the candidates that they put before us. But if you are going to change the parameters now, then that would be up to the Hall to say, to instruct us, here are the candidates for this year's ballot. You are to consider them based on their contributions on and off the field, and any political views that you feel are relevant should be considered, criminal history, criminal past. I mean, they have to be more specific because they've really done a good job of obfuscating what is and isn't a Hall of Famer. They've basically asked us to do the heavy lifting.
So here's the part of the discussion I think that doesn't get mentioned, and you've touched on this. Every time something comes up like the Curt Schilling balloting or the 2021 class, and a guy like Schilling does not get in, and we'll talk about in a moment the fact whether or not he really deserves to be a legend of the game. But instead of going after Bob Klapisch and members of the BBWAA, should the public's ire not be more aimed at Cooperstown and go to the individuals there and say, you're the ones that need to change the rules. You have to be more clear about it because you're leaving everybody out here to basically decide what is moral and what is character. Unless you tell us what it is, then the human condition itself and the writers should not be held accountable.
That's exactly what my point is. You know, that it's an unfair burden to place on the writers. It's an unwinnable war for me to judge Curt Schilling based on his political beliefs. I mean, you know, as I've been saying all along, I don't care how far right he is. You know, conversely, I wouldn't care if he was, you know, advocating for Antifa, because that just wouldn't be relevant to my mission as a baseball writer to the judge on Hall of Fame. politics are politics. It's his First Amendment right to express that sentiment in any way he wants, as long as he's not committing a crime or infringing upon the rights of others. And I know I've had people say, racism is not an opinion, racism is not a First Amendment right. To me, that's still subjective. Okay, if you can get Curt Schilling, you can place him at the Capitol riots there that day. Okay, we have a different discussion. Right now, to me, all he has done is express an opinion in support of those rioters. I disagree, but to me, it's not enough to keep him out of the hall.
Are we then seeing it because you're part of the BBWAA, so then you deal immediately with Cooperstown. Do you sense any movement whatsoever on the part of the Baseball Hall of Fame to get involved and to make this delineation, to make it clearer, or do they simply just not give a damn?
I haven't heard of any movement on that. Frankly, I think they kind of enjoy the fact that we're squirming and we're in the middle of this intense yearly annual debate, because it certainly creates interest in the hall, and it creates great buzz, and it makes the Hall of Fame relevant. I don't think they want that burden, because, like I said, it's unwinnable.
But
it's
they
an
deserve
unwinnable
that
war.
burden. If they're going to set the rules, they're
course
the
they
ones
do.
who should be doing it.
But if they can get away with putting it on us, why not? Look, there are a lot of people who think that the writers shouldn't have a vote, period, that it should be either decided upon by ex-players, which I think is a mistake, or the fans, which would be another mistake. I guess we are the most neutral and well-informed body in an imperfect process. We're the best they've got. We're the best option. But certain rules have to be established by the people who basically own the Hall of Fame, who created it. It's their intellectual property, and I think they have to do a better job of defining what it really is.
Which then comes to the next point, because we're talking about baseball writers. Look, the writers in my era, when I grew up, and people like you, solid, you're covering the game constantly. You're there 24/7. You live, eat, sleep, and breathe baseball. Writing has changed over the last decade or so. There are no longer, in a lot of cases, beat writers. They don't have the 24/7 beat that they used to have, and you now have broadcasters who are involved, radio and television people who are covering the team at almost the same level that writers are. So is it time to take the BBWAA and say, okay, guys, you're there, but to start finding the writers that are there on a full-time basis, such as yourself, you're dedicated to the sport, but then also include radio, social media, television, if you will, people who are there on a regular basis. I'll just bring up a guy like Jack Buck. Buck is there constantly. He's around the sport at all times, and I'm not making a case for Jack Buck to be included in the voting, and I'm not going to speak for him. But is it not time to expand who's part of the voting, because writers no longer should be considered the holy grail of deciding who gets into the Hall of Fame?
There's a lot of people whose opinions I would respect, and whose votes I would count without second thought, who deserve a vote. I could think of several in New York, people who are very well informed, are in touch with the team in New York at Yankee Stadium. They understand the game as it's being played in front of them, and they are deserving of vote. I would not be opposed to expanding the eligible pool of voters. There's no question. And there's a lot of writers who don't deserve a vote. They've been retired. They don't cover the game anymore, right? And they're not around anymore. They just don't watch on a daily basis. And they don't deserve to be part of this. So I'm all in favor of rejiggering the algorithm as to who votes and who doesn't vote, because, like I said, I'm thinking of a handful of people, like half dozen of individuals who cover the Yankees outside of the BBWAA, who would make fine voters, well-credentialed voters.
But you still have the power held by the BBWAA. How do we change that? Is it?
Well, that's the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame
to loosen it up.
That's the Hall of Fame. They've given us the mandate. They basically controlled the voting since the first year of the Hall's inception, 1936. It's been our baby since then, but it's not our process. If the Hall of Fame wants to include, radio broadcasters, TV people, Michael Kay, for instance, or David Cohn in New York, or Sweeney Murdy in WFAN, really, really smart guys, really whose opinions I seek all the time. I talk baseball with them all the time, and they're just as important to the process as me, and just as deserving as me. But that's not my call. It's not the BBWA's call. It would have to be the Hall of Fame to decide, okay, we're going to change the pool.
But are we again at a point where the BBWAA and the people in charge are not ones who are going to come out and say, hey, maybe we should let somebody else in here? Because let's face it,
that's not going to happen.
These are guys who enjoy the notoriety, and they enjoy being maybe not even the notoriety, but being the singular people who can put people in the Hall of Fame. They're never going to call for it. So they're not
going to open the gates and say, come on in, folks,
Sure,
everybody, and join in the fun. No. I mean, I'm sure that my opinion would be part of a small minority. Most baseball writers, especially the older ones, would classify what I just said as heresy. So I don't see much chance of that happening. Certainly not being generated or initiated by the BBWA. Most writers would disagree with what I just said.
But it would have to be Cooperstown then, and the people there, the powers that be, if you will. Who's the individual involved? I mean, is there a committee? I mean, this is what the public doesn't know. And you can enlighten them to this. Is there a committee, a management, a leadership at Cooperstown, one or two people who make these sort of decisions who need to be pushed?
There's a chair, there's a president of the Hall of Fame, there's an executive committee, and there's also a liaison with the commissioner's office. It's sort of an organic process how these decisions are made. There's a veterans committee also, which is apart from BBWA. They are attached to the Hall of Fame. There are a lot of moving parts that would have to take up a proposal like this. And you don't hear about them, you don't see about them. It's basically the exposure for the Hall's voting falls entirely on the BBWA, but we're not the only entity. It's not just us.
They like being quiet. They like being. I think your point that you hit is something that nobody really talks about. I think the people at the Hall of Fame are thrilled to death that you and I are sitting here talking about this, and that the hammer is falling on Bob Klapisch and members of the BBWAA for the balloting here and for the voting, because they get to hide. It's basically, don't look, we're behind the curtain. They're like the Wizard of Oz at this point, where they don't want to be seen.
Except in July, when the ceremony takes place in Cooperstown, then they're front and center.
Sure,
they like that part.
They're basically throwing the trash at. Look, hey, if there's trash out there, throw it on Klapisch and those guys out there, because we don't have to get involved. No, the time is to get Cooperstown involved at this point, and to change here. Because otherwise, we're going to be sitting with this morality clause forever, which is so vague, it's ridiculous. It comes down to another discussion. Hall of Fame. To me, if you're in a Hall of Fame, any Hall of Fame, you've got to be legendary. I mean, you've got to be really a great. And the word great is so thrown around so casually anymore with great players and great plays, and they're not great. And that's what, when we started the show, we heard a commentator in Boston say, Curt Schilling is really good, but he's not worthy of being in the Hall of Fame, because we get down to that delineating line here, Bob. So Curt Schilling, let's talk about Curt then here, bring him into this. To many people, yeah, he was part of a great team in Arizona, and part of a great effort in Boston for times. But he's not a great player. He's not a legendary player. You don't think of him in those terms. And if you look, every year his vote total gets a little bit more. His numbers haven't changed. He hasn't done anything on the field to change it. So what is all of a sudden he's becoming a legend here for? Bob, I think we've got to talk about, if you're going to put somebody in the Hall of Fame, they've got to be legendary, period, end of story, stop. It doesn't change when they retire. You're either in or you're out.
Well, I mean, I think you have to understand that the Hall of Fame voting is a process. There's a reason why a player can stay on the ballot for 10 years. You have 10 opportunities to reflect on those numbers and put them into context. Because if what you're saying were true, you're either in or out, then it should be a one-time ballot. You're either good enough or you're not, and you don't get a second shot at it. Like a presidential election, you don't get to do it over and over and over again. Not normally. Right?
Don't go there.
But no, we're not going to go there. But I mean, it used to be 15 years on the ballot. Now it's 10 years to measure this player against others. And there have been times when players are the 11th best candidate on the ballot, so they don't get in that year. But the next year, they're the 7th best candidate on the ballot, and they do get in. It doesn't mean the player was any better or any worse. The numbers haven't changed, obviously. But you have to put numbers in perspective. And to me, there's a difference between a first ballot Hall of Famer and a 10th year, final year Hall of Famer. I mean, Curt Schilling obviously was not Bob Gibson. He wasn't Tom Seaver. He wasn't Cy Young, but he was pretty darn good. I mean, he was a force in October. So I don't think I don't think he deserved a first or second year induction, because that's reserved for the best of the best of the best. You're right. There has to be a notation for somebody who's so good that it only takes one ballot to figure out. Mariano Rivera, Derek Jeter, of course, Cal Ripken, of course they get in first ballot. But, you know, there's others who are still great that you have to take a couple of years to measure against the others who are on that year.
All right, I'm
okay,
gonna stop
that's
you
my
there.
point.
But that's the point. A couple of years to get there. And I'm going to, again, play the devil's advocate on this. The career is done. You're retired for X number of years. What is it, 10 years before you can be eligible for the Hall of Fame?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
10 years. So in 10 years, we're able to look back at X players' efforts in baseball. It doesn't change. You're either great and legendary based on what you did on the field in that span of time, or it doesn't make a difference. 10 years, it shouldn't change a lick, Bob, because your numbers haven't changed. And what are we going to, does that then say that we're judging you greatness based on an additional 10 years? That doesn't sound right. Something's not clicking there.
Well, based on what you said, that it should be a one-time appearance on the ballot.
Yes.
And if you're not good enough for a first ballot, you're not good enough, period. That's definitely a philosophy. There are some people who believe that. However, what if you have 10 great candidates? What if you have 15 in any year? You have 15 great candidates, and the Hall says you can only vote for 10. What do you do with the other 5?
Here we go. It's
what do you do with the other 5?
Setting it. If there's 15 great players in one year, put 15 great players in the Hall of Fame. End of
okay,
story.
go to the Hall. I'll give you their number and email. You can go talk to them. It's not my choice. I'm only playing by their rules.
I get that. I get that. And that, again, comes down to the Hall of Fame, which is setting the rules. And the rules are so analogous in so many ways. There's so many interpretations that can be made of it that to me, you're either in or you're out, because the case will be that Curt Schilling, had great moments. And as we heard Verducci say, and others have said, that in the postseason, he was great and part of great teams. And of course, other people will want to put him in for the bloody sock, which really wasn't real. But we're it really wasn't. Okay, come on. Okay, but we'll get to that another time. But it just doesn't make sense to me that players keep getting better and better and better and better when they're not playing. And that to me.
Well, look, one more point. Let me come at it another way. All right. In terms of history, a presidency looks different for 4 years in hindsight as it does 20 years in hindsight, 30 years in hindsight. I mean, the facts haven't changed. A president's historical record doesn't change, but it looks different if you evaluate it 4 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later. The facts around that presidency have changed. Circumstances have changed. World events have changed. It has changed your perspective on it. I mean, people feel differently about maybe Lyndon Johnson today than they did 30 years ago. Ronald Reagan. I mean, perspectives change over time, and that's true, I think, of Hall of Famers. That's not just numbers. You're looking at them in perspective of their overall contributions at the time. I think, for instance, opinions about the PED era are changing now. People feel differently now than they did 10 years ago, which is why Bonds and Clemens, I think their candidacies have stalled. But when they started, when their candidacies were first introduced on the ballot, people said, nah, hell, no way. I mean, their numbers have climbed because people are becoming more forgiving and understanding that this was a time, an era in baseball. Look, I'm opposed to PEDs. I'm not advocating for them, but I'm saying people are now beginning to put it into perspective that the PED era was no different than the spitball era before 1920. It was just how baseball was played at the time. And PEDs were just how baseball was played in the late 1990s into the early 2000s. And you got to put those numbers in perspective. So I'm just saying that facts change. Perspectives change. The facts don't change, but perspectives change based on the flow of history.
See, and what I would counter with that, it's a great argument. What I would counter with that is that baseball and sports is a game of numbers. And it is a game of what you do at that point. Now, if what you've done on the field, and I had this, it's interesting because I had this discussion on Facebook recently where I asked about great players not only on the field, but their events off the field, how they changed the game, if you will. And that's a long legacy. In the case of somebody like a Curt Schilling, he didn't change the game. I mean, he had great moments, but there's nothing he really did on the field that has changed the overall scope and the play of the game. Now, again, a Bonds and a McGuire and a Sosa, certainly with what they did in using PEDs, changed the scope of the game and changed things for generations, perhaps even moving forward. But I see what you're saying, but to me, it's a guy like Schilling. He really didn't do anything to better the game.
Well, his
of
numbers,
baseball.
he performed at a very high level at the time when the game is played at its highest level, right? I mean, he was at his best when the level of play is at its best in October. That, to me, is the greatest judge of a person's talent, is his competitive nature, his warrior ethos, so to speak. If you can do it in October, you're pretty darn good, which is one of the reasons Mariano Rivera is a historical figure. Look at his numbers in October. I mean, they're almost inhuman. So you do it then, I think, to me, you get special consideration. And that's why Schilling is why I voted for him, because he did it at a time when it's the hardest to do.
Okay, case made. This is one of those reach into the bag of tricks conversations that we're going to have forever. And I know we had this discussion back in the 90s on the radio show, because I got us to go out and find the tapes. But it's great conversation. But at the same point, you're right. We need to get onto the Baseball Hall of Fame. They need to set these rules. Either they're going to have the rules that are going to be set hard. See, to me, I'm a black and white guy. I mean, here it is. If you're gonna put morality and character in here, you need to define morality and character immediately. You need to have a long definition of it, or take it out completely.
Totally agree.
Morals clause gone. Here's what you did on the field. End of story. Stop with this nonsense about morality and character. Because
however, let me just interrupt you. The morals clause is appropriately considered when we talk about Pete Rose. Now, to me, what he did, his morals, his lack of judgment, his lack of character directly affected how the game was played.
The game.
Okay?
Right.
The game. Because he was betting on games that he managed. He violated the core rule, the foundation of the game's integrity. So, which is why I will never vote for. Actually, I can't vote for him. He's not on the ballot. I have no chance to vote for him or not. But if I were given the chance to vote for him, I would not. I will not write his name in until he passes away. That's the price he has to pay. Well, so that is one case where the morals or the character clause does apply and should be applied to Pete Rose.
The conversation I've always had regarding Pete Rose is simple. I think Pete Rose gets into the Hall of Fame. My first arguments were that he admits that he bet on baseball and he broke the Cardinal rule, which Pete has done. Yeah, sort of. He has come out and then he's backed up. But first you have to say, yes, I did it, and admit it. The second thing is on Pete Rose's Hall of Fame plaque, it can not only list his greatness, but you can't take that away from him, but the plaque has to say he was kicked out of baseball because he admitted betting on baseball and breaking the cardinal rule of the game. And that has to be right there so that generations can see that for the rest of time. If that happens, Pete Rose is in the Hall of Fame. But you and I both know
that's
that's not going to happen.
Well, he signed the agreement, being banned, right?
Sure.
By Faye Vincent. He signed off on it. It wasn't he was just kicked out. He agreed to his banishment. So
which Pete has backed up on several times, but we still have the
I know. Now he feels sorry about it. Now he regrets it, but his name is on that document. And to me, that's the most damning piece of evidence.
Look, I sat with Faye Vincent one day in an interview at his home a long time ago, and we talked about this on the record and off the record. And off the record, same thing. When Faye looked at me and said, yes, he did, without question. And I'll stand on that until I die and well past his death. And God, it should be for that point. But you're right. But again, Hall of Fame, it's not the writers. It is the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown that has to decide this. Okay, let's roll a couple of things here that are actually based. Well, I'm going to go off the field again because I have to bring this up. Mickey Callaway and the New York Mets, and now he's been named by The Athletic in another issue, and it looks like Mickey has pretty much destroyed his career in baseball, regardless of what happens. But this brings up a greater story and a greater question. with Callaway and what the Mets discovered, and there have been other individuals with the Mets that have been discovered to be doing things off the field that would bring ill repute to the organization, and the ownership has gotten involved, and there's been social media insanity about this. Does this not point out to Major League Baseball and every single team, you have got to vet in this day and age every single individual that comes into your organization greater and with more stringency than you ever would have done before, because this sets the game back, sets the franchise back, and brings about a destruction of a brand that you just can't afford in this day and age of multi-billion-dollar franchises. And you've got to make sure that people like this, Bob, are set adrift forever. Make a mistake like this, get involved, you're out, period, end of story.
Yeah, I mean, the Mickey Callaways of the game can never be given another chance. I mean, they have to be driven out of the game. I mean, I started covering baseball in an era when there were no such rules, that, you know, it was an old boys network, you know, and it's so different now. And there's so much more respect given towards female journalists, and rightfully so. There's so many more female journalists, period. And they have to be treated with respect, and they have to be treated as professionals. And I think by and large, baseball has moved in the right way, in the right direction. The culture of the press box has improved a lot, but obviously there's still more work to do, and people like Mickey Callaway have no place in the game. But, you know, getting to your original point, how do you find out? I mean, how do you know? I mean, I'm not around the Mets that much. I'm around the Yankees a lot, but I didn't know that Mickey Callaway was such a dog. And it's hard to do that work unless the females, the women come and make these charges known, make their feelings known. And if they just keep it to themselves or talk amongst themselves, it's hard for that to go all the way up to the level of Sandy Alderson. I mean, I feel bad for Sandy Alderson. I mean, he's a 72-year-old guy, and he's supposed to be digging into Mickey Callaway's texting history. I don't know how he does that. Do you hire a detective?
Yes.
Do you dig into their social media? I guess you have to now.
Yes.
I guess you really have to just suspect everybody until they prove otherwise.
Well, that's just it. We've opened up a whole new era here because of social media, where,
yeah.
I mean, look, and you're right. I've covered sports a long time too, whether it be football, baseball, whatever. We as the media knew more of the dirt that went on than anybody else. And let's be honest, we're complicit in many ways, because there were those of us who covered teams years ago. We covered up for players. I mean, we never reported the stuff that we knew, because we knew that if we did, our press credentials gone, we're not covering the team anymore, we're not going to be making money, our station or our newspaper will probably fire us at that point. So we were basically protecting our own butts as we went along the way. But we knew about this. But at this stage of the game in 21st century, with social media and with people, adults, doing stupidly ridiculous, unbelievable things on social media, sending pictures of themselves naked, you know, going after women with harassing texts and all this. It's there, but Bob, I think it's got to come down to the teams and baseball itself. They got to get hard-edged on this and say, you're out. That's it.
Yeah.
And I don't think they've done it yet. I think baseball is still acting on a little bit of the old boy routine, even though there's amazing reporters who are out there. I don't think baseball does a good enough job. I don't think any sport does a good enough job of doing this and making sure that the Neanderthals are out.
Well, you know, part of it too is just this naive belief that in this day and age, who would be that stupid? I don't think Sandy Alderson, I don't think it would cross Sandy Alderson's mind that Mickey Callaway would be so stupid and so sick. I mean, think about it. I mean, what is he possibly thinking? That he wouldn't get caught? You text and harass woman after woman after woman from one market to the next market to the next market. Did he not think sooner or later that somebody's going to blow the whistle on him? How could he possibly think he was going to get away with this?
They believe they will get away with it, as everybody does, whether you're the 16-year-old kid at high school who's doing it, or you're the 67-year-old woman who's out there going after a guy that she desperately wants, who's 40 years younger than she is. You believe that you're going to get away with it, and it will never come up to show because you're famous, you've got power, you've got money, and they just don't listen. Hey, Bob, I teach people this in my business about social media, and I can go back and look at 10 years of evidence, and they go, wow, really? He said that? Are you crazy? But I think that's part of it. People don't think they're ever going to get caught, especially athletes, entertainers, and those who are famous.
But Mickey Callaway was his first managing job. You would think that he'd do everything possible to protect his career. This is the shot he'd always been waiting for, the opportunity he'd spent a lifetime waiting for, and he goes and he blows it like that. I mean, and second part of it is just basic human nature. When you, for any guy, I'm not even talking about Callaway, but anybody, you approach somebody, a woman, a pretty woman, and you make an overture and you don't get a response. Like, basic human nature said, maybe it's not a good idea. Maybe you give it a second shot, just take throw a Hail Mary, maybe. And then when you don't get a response on the second one, then you say, okay, I'm out. She's not interested. And you just turn tail and you go in the other direction. Most normal people, well-adjusted people, will take the hint.
Well-adjusted. And that's,
right?
And that's
I mean, most grounded people realize she's not interested. I'm going to leave her alone. But Mickey Callaway sending and Jared Porter sending 60 unreplied texts. 60. You got to be nuts. I mean, how do you do that?
Well, but that's why the point is that Major League Baseball and every franchise, and not only baseball, but the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, MLS, PGA, LPGA. I mean, you can go on and on and on. NASCAR, take every single organization. Plus, then the franchises, they have to spend the money, the time, and they have to be absolutely hard-assed in all this with their investigations and find everything out about every single person they hire, because then you have a Callaway snapback, and people are going, oh,
right.
Christ, the Mets again? Can't you get your act together? So
terrible,
they're going to have to do it, and because adults don't seem to understand the ramifications of all this. But I would hope they would sooner or later do this. Okay, 2021 season, COVID-19, all of this involved here. The Major League Baseball Players Association has gotten involved, and the Major League Baseball Players Association has come back and said, nope, wait a minute, okay, we're going to play the games. We're going to play 162. We're not going to go 154. Bob, it seems as if the Players Union itself is one of those organizations that is completely clueless when it comes to the fact that we are still in a pandemic that is still killing an average of 3,000 people a day, and they've got to be careful. Is this really a fight that the union wants to pick at this point?
And I'm so disgusted with the entire process that's going on between the owners and the players. It's all they're doing is they're posturing and doing calisthenics for the upcoming collective bargaining agreement. Yep. Guarantee you right now there's going to be a labor disruption after 2021, a strike, a lockout, whatever you want to call it. There's not going to be baseball at the outset because these two sides hate each other. It's personal. It's vicious. They don't trust each other. Not even they can't even come to a reasonable compromise in the middle of a pandemic. Both sides made mistakes, egregious mistakes in this last round of negotiations, if you want to even call it that. Rob Manfred waited until 2 weeks before pitchers and catchers to decide, well, maybe we should wait a month. He knew that proposal was going to get shot down. There were players already in Florida getting ready. Teams up until that point had been told to ramp up, get ready to open camp on February 15th, 16th. You can't just say 2 weeks before, let's rethink this, guys. The union is just not going to go for it. Okay, so that was poor timing on management part. I'm not even sure they wanted to have it. I think they wanted to put the union in a position where they would be the bad guys and say no. They really were interested in getting a compromise. They would have started this process in January and not waited till the first couple of days of February. Flip side, the union did not want to even offer a counteroffer. They just said, no, we want a full season. We want our money. We didn't get paid last year. We're not going to do it again. They didn't even make a counteroffer or counter proposal, something meet the owners in the middle. And it's such a bad look. As you say, 3,000 people a day are dying from COVID. The infection rate in Arizona is through the roof. In Florida, it's really bad. People are going to be at risk, not just the players, but the support staff, reporters. I mean, it's a dangerous assignment right now. So now the fact that the players didn't even offer a counter proposal. I mean, from a strict ideological standpoint, a unionist would say we can't negotiate down. We have our rights, and we make a counter proposal. We immediately start giving away tenets of the CBA that are ours. If we make a counter proposal, we start chipping away against ourselves. Maybe that's true in theory, but we're talking about COVID. I mean, there's got to be a better way to do this. All the management wanted, all the union owners wanted, was to delay a month, play 154 games. Let's get more people vaccinated. Let's get more people in the stands so they can actually generate revenue again, and you'll get your money. We'll just extend the playoffs into November a little further. That's not an outrageous proposal. It should not have been met with a flat no from the players. And it's one of the reasons why people are, the average fan is now so disconnected from baseball and why attendance is falling. Because people look at this process and say, there's nobody to root for. Both of you guys stink.
Well, haven't we been here before, though, Bob? It seems like what you just said is the same thing that we've heard, at least I've heard, half a dozen times before when it comes down to knowing that we're a year away from a collective bargaining agreement. Somebody's stupid. Somebody decides to fight. Somebody just wants to go ahead and make a fuss. Why do we hear? It's unconscionable. Why is the union picking a fight that isn't smart, that doesn't speak to the fans, and that makes them look as recklessly careless as possible in a year when everybody's got to at least have a little common sense moving forward?
Right.
It seems as if they're being run by complete idiots.
Well, they're run by hardcore ideologues, I mean, who don't want to give in. I mean, it's run by a lot of ex-players now who still have that competitive gene in them that we can't lose, to never back down. There's no sense of compromise on their side. And, you know, like I said, the commissioner has made a series of mistakes on his own. He comes off as completely detached and doesn't seem to really love baseball. I think he's more of a labor lawyer than he is a commissioner. I don't sense that he loved the game the way Bud Selig did, I think, at the outset before he got corrupted. But I think Bud loved the game. And I don't know if Rob Manfred loves the game. I think he's out to beat the union. Similarly, I think the union has so little respect for the commissioner that when Rob Manfred and Tony Clark get together to talk, or their seconds get together to talk, there's nothing but mistrust in the air. The motive questioning alone is what's going to keep baseball from compromising. And it's going to lead to a strike at the end of this year. There's no question about it. The chemistry is so toxic right now.
Knowing then that we're facing another strike, another job action, we've heard all this before. Every time it comes up, it's going to be the death knell for baseball. Baseball will never recover. Baseball will lose billions. Franchises will go out of business and players will be without jobs. Stop. It never seems to happen that way, Bob. I mean, baseball seems to have this rubber-like resilience where they will bounce back one way or another. Isn't it fair to say that, sure, there's going to be a strike and there'll be a job action, but for whatever reason, baseball is going to survive and the millionaires are going to make billions again, and 5 years from now, it'll be just like nothing happened?
You're right. I mean, baseball's never going to go out of business. I mean, there's never not going to be baseball. But let's look at the trend line. The attendance is going down. The age of the average viewer is going up and up and up. Younger fans are leaving the game or have left it already. I mean, soccer is gaining in popularity because it's a 2-hour package, run it with a running clock, and you don't have any of the sort of the excess baggage that you get. You don't have 4-hour games in soccer. And I think so many of those things are driving fans away. Attendance is down, and TV ratings are down for this reason. Now we'll see if they play a full season. We'll see if those fans come back. But last year I thought was a real turnoff to the general public. And to your long range question, what will happen to baseball 5-10 years from now? There are always going to be New York Yankees and the LA Dodgers. They will always be around. But my fear is that baseball is going to sort of downsize itself to become hockey. It'll become a parochial sport and not the major sport that I knew when I first started covering. Look what's happened to sports media. Look at how many old baseball writers are out of jobs. I mean, newspapers are dying. And part of that attachment to baseball was newspapers, was the beat reporters in the clubhouse. That's an extinct species. What I do will probably not exist 10 years from now. And I think the overall,
unfortunately, right? I think you and people like you who are dedicated to the sport, I think you're dinosaurs. Unfortunately,
there's no question. I mean, we are like the salesmen who sold blocks of ice in the 1920s and late 1920s to homes to chill their food, to preserve their food, just before the advent of refrigerators. Eventually, those guys who sold blocks of ice they went out of business. They had to find something else to do with their lives. And I think that's what's happening to the average baseball writer. We are becoming obsolete as the sport itself changes. And unfortunately, I don't see it's a change for the good.
Isn't that part of it, though, the fact that when you talk about the baseball's getting older and the younger don't want to get in there, they don't want to be part of it. The younger generation does not read as they used to. They don't spend a lot of time. If it's not in 15, 20-second bites, then it's unnecessary. If the video's not in 30 seconds or less and they can't be part of it, it's unnecessary.
Right.
You're looking at social media, where again it has to be Facebook pops, hot takes, which is one of the things
TikTok.
that I cannot stand when people say, "Oh, we got to get a hot take." No, you don't. How about telling a story? How about giving us the inside of what goes on? You've done this for years. Others have done this for years. Nobody tells the stories of the athlete anymore. But then again, the athlete doesn't give a crap, because the athlete basically wants to go out and be part of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, be what they want. They don't want to be part of stories anymore. So isn't this all just part of the general disconnect that social media and the changing mores of media have brought about to baseball and every single other sport there is? People, the passion is gone, Bob, and I don't know if we're ever going to get it back.
No, certainly not the way it used to exist. I mean, look, back in the 80s, New York City was on a first name basis with the Mets. There was Straw and Doc and Kid and Nails. I mean, there's no such attachment now to Aaron Judge. I mean, people really don't know Aaron Judge. Yeah, Aaron Judge happens to be a great guy, but people don't know him the way Met fans used to feel like they knew Keith Hernandez or Ron Darling. That era has changed because of social media and because of what you just said. The players no longer need newspapers or TV to get their message out. They have their own social media.
Right.
And I don't think the average fan really wants to know the deep dive into Aaron Judge's life. They just want to see him hit home runs. That's good enough.
Well, I don't think
So
a guy like Aaron Judge cares. I mean, look, I don't know him. I wouldn't know him if he stole a freight train. But quite frankly, I don't think Aaron Judge cares if you know about his life. Look, my Twitter feed runs, I get paid, I cash my checks, and I go home, and I want a little anonymity. And part of it is, we could do hours on this too. There's no more that great relationship between hardworking press that you could trust and you could actually have a relationship with. That's gone. That's completely gone anymore. Players are scared.
It's absolutely true. And Judge happens to be one of the better guys in the game. He actually is a great guy in the game. So I happen to agree with you that relationship, and part of it too is what's happened with circumstances beyond our control because of COVID. Writers are last year were no longer allowed in the clubhouse. I have not had a face-to-face one-on-one interview with Aaron Judge in a year. And part of what makes good sports writing, good writing in general, obviously is access and to be able to talk to somebody and develop a relationship with them over the course of 6 months in a baseball season. You really get to know somebody and you can write about them with insight when you have spent time at their locker every single day. Instead, now I'm on Zoom with 30 other writers asking the same questions, sharing the same information, and it's just not the same. It makes for really shallow journalism, and it reflects in the kind of stories you can write and you can't write.
Well, all I can hope is that Bob Klapisch writes for another 10, 20 years. I'll be very happy.
I don't know about that. I got to get my kids through college, and then I'm at the finish line.
Okay, see, now that's just it. That's what people don't understand. In this business, we got to get the kids through college. I got to get the house paid off, and then the wife and I are going to have the empty nest. We're going to move someplace. We're going to walk away from it all, and we're going to have some fun in our lives. People don't understand that sometimes. That's all.
Well, there's a colleague of mine at the Star Ledger, Brendan Cuddy, who's an excellent baseball writer. He does, the grunt work. He's a beat writer, and he's only in his 30s. And I told him, actually, we had this conversation not long ago. I said, you've got to find something else to do so you can get through your 40s and your 50s when you do get married, when you have kids, and be able to support them. Because sports writing, baseball writing is not going to be it. Maybe you get yourself on TV. There's very few jobs doing that, but actual beat writing.
Trust me, that's no great panacea anymore. It used to be television. Now they're blowing people out, and we have people now reporting on. You have very few local affiliates really do sports anymore. They certainly don't do hardcore sports anymore. Look, we've got a station near where I live that they've turned their sports reporting over to the talkers from the local ESPN radio affiliate. They're not even television professionals, and they come on the air, and it's embarrassing, but it's cheap, it's easy, and news doesn't have to worry about it anymore. So I mean, it's
Right.
long.
So for print and electronic media, I mean, the long-term future is not good. So if I was in my 30s, single, I'd be looking for plan B, plan D, because plan A is not going to be there forever.
Hey, our buddy Dave Sheinin from the Washington Post.
Right.
Dave just announced within the last couple of days that he's no longer going to be doing baseball full time. He's now going to be writing for the Post and working on his music career, which is great. But he's going to be writing about the intersection between sports and society now.
Right.
It's
now, to me, great for Dave. I'm glad he's working at such a great. Washington Post will be around forever. He never has to worry about a job. But the fact that Dave Sheinin is not writing baseball anymore, hardcore baseball, and won't see him in the press box anymore, that's a loss. And just this week, Tim Brown from Yahoo got laid off. I mean, Tim Brown is one of the giants of the industry as well. I mean, it's like all the foliage around me is dying. I mean, it's awful.
I find the same thing when it comes. I mean, look, as I'm doing this show and as we're growing, I turn to individuals such as yourself and their great friendships that I've cultivated over the years, because I'll say this out loud, a lot of the current generation of sports reporters, anchors, are worthless, in my opinion. The current generation, they have no passion for it. They don't want to get involved. To them, it's a gig. Put on the makeup, get paid, walk home. Oh, let's go to the radio station right now. Let's create something that people are going to scream about, because that's what they want. The programmers only want, give us as much anger as you possibly can and light up the phones and tweet like crazy. Worthless.
That's the world we live in.
I'd love to see some young talent come up and get better, and I'd love to be able to focus on them. But there's not a lot of great young talent out there in sports anymore. Okay, well, we could go on for hours and hours, but I got to let you go back and shovel snow.
Okay.
And we must do this again. I am not going to let the length of time go between the next time we talk and now, as it's been for years. It's been much too long. Much too long.
I'm going to hold you to that, definitely.
You are still the absolute best there is at what you do. I want to remind everybody that there's a couple of ways to make sure that you read what Bob does. First of all, the Newark Star Ledger. Bob is a preeminent writer in baseball, and I cannot stress enough that if you read him at the Newark Star Ledger, you will get all of his comments and all of his columns. You can also, on social media, it's at Bob Klap is where you can find him as well. Is there any place else? I mean, I know that. Are you writing any books? Because you've done this.
Well, I just wrote the Yankee book in 2018 about. I spent a year actually away from newspapers. I embedded with the Yankees, and I wrote a book about how this organization really operates in the post-George Steinbrenner era, how they remade themselves inside the empire. And Brian Cashman was good enough to give me access. Randy Levine, the team president, Hal Steinbrenner, they all allowed me inside the vault. And I wrote about the team from the inside as opposed to from the outside. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my career to be able to do that and not have to worry about deadline every night, have to rush back up to the press box 30 minutes after the last out. I was allowed to really sort of dig down deep and find out what really happens with the Yankees and how did they remake themselves from the old George Steinbrenner Yankees to this now modern, really well-run, efficient organization under Brian Cashman. And it made the New York Times bestseller list. So I was very happy about that. So
Here's what we need to do. We need to do a show, one show just on that book and everything you found out there, because it is the Yankees. They are global in their appeal. And then to discuss what other franchises are doing wrong and then how they could learn from what the Yankees did. Because, look, there still is, they may not have been a World Series champion for some time, but the Yankees are still the power in baseball. Mention them anyway.
There's no question. I mean, they need a championship just for their own sanity, but they never lose money. They always draw well. They've never had a losing season under Cashman in almost 30 years now, 20 years under him, go all the way back to the early 90s. I mean, they are really a model of efficiency. And this book examines why.
All right. We're going to do that. We'll do that. We'll do baseball and a whole lot more. Listen, all
right.
I absolutely can't thank you enough. Please stay healthy, stay well. Find somebody to shovel your walk. Don't hurt your back.
And, it's just me.
And keep playing baseball, man. There's
I will.
Bob
I believe me, I will.
Still out there playing in his leagues every day. Well, I'll tell you, we got to get. Is there any footage that exists of you playing baseball? Any video?
Present day. Well, we didn't play last year. Our league was
current.
suspended because of COVID. Yeah, I can. There will be this summer.
Okay.
All right.
We've never shown it.
And we should say 18 and up league. I'm not playing in some men's senior league over 40s. 18 up, playing against college kids.
I mean, look, you're good. I know you've been doing this for a long time. I sure as hell wouldn't get on a baseball field with you. Are you kidding? Hell, I'm going to do Sega with you next time. That's about as far as I'm going to go. That's it.
All right,
Bob,
deal.
Thanks so much, partner.
Right.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
Very soon. Oh, it's always a pleasure.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks, Ed.
Bob Klapisch, don't forget the Newark Star Ledger, and we're going to have him back here again. You can find us all. Go to welcometothearena.com to watch all the shows. Look for Sports Pulse and look for the Man in the Arena on all the various podcast platforms. We're there, and you can hear every single show just by going and listening. Thanks to Bob Klapisch. Thanks, everybody. Good to talk baseball for a change. Stay healthy, all right? Until we meet again, I'm Ed Berliner. Rock on, true believers. See ya.
You're still here?
Are you not entertained?
It's over.
All right, hey. All right, good job, guys. Let's just not come in tomorrow. Let's just take a day.
Go home.
I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Go.
That's all, folks.